Cloud Imperium just said their single-player campaign is fully playable, 40 hours long, shipping in 2026. And if you've been around this project longer than a coffee break, every part of that sentence should trigger your bullshit detector. Except there's this weird thing happening where even the refund subreddit is starting to go quiet. Not convinced, just quiet, which is possibly more unsettling than if they were still screaming about scams. You probably remember where you were when you first backed this thing. Maybe it was 2013, and you watched that initial pitch video with the Hornet flying through an asteroid field, thinking, yeah, 2 years, I can wait 2 years. Or maybe you came in later during one of those free fly events where your friend swore it was almost done, just needed a bit more time, and then a bit more. And then, well, you know how this story goes. The thing about following a project this long is you develop this strange relationship with disappointment. It stops feeling like betrayal and starts feeling like that uncle who keeps promising to quit smoking but shows up to Thanksgiving with a fresh pack. You're not even mad anymore, just tired. But then something shifts. Maybe it's the way they're talking now, or maybe it's that 40-minute prologue demo from last year that didn't look like a carefully edited highlight reel. It looked like someone just played the game, bugs and all, which is either the most elaborate fake-out in gaming history, or something actually changed behind those closed doors in Manchester. Fully playable is one of those phrases that means absolutely nothing until you understand the context. In development speak, it's the difference between having a manuscript and having a published book. The words are all there, the story flows from beginning to end, but nobody's checked if you spelled definitely wrong 47 times. You can read it technically. Should you? Different question entirely. What trips people up is thinking this means ready for store shelves. It doesn't. It means content complete. Every mission exists, every cutscene is rendered, every voice line is recorded. Mark Hamill did his thing. Gary Oldman did his thing. Gillian Anderson showed up and presumably also did her thing. The game has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You can boot it up and play from fade in to credits without hitting a wall that says this section not yet implemented. Most people hear this and think, so it's done, just ship it. But there's this massive gap between playable and shippable that swallows entire studios. You know how Star Citizen right now has that thing where sometimes your ship just decides gravity is optional? Imagine that happening during a critical story moment with Mark Hamill staring at you. That's what the next year is for, making sure the dramatic tension doesn't get murdered by your character suddenly T-posing through a bulkhead. The part nobody talks about is why this matters beyond just Squadron 42. CIG has been running two parallel developments for over a decade, the Persistent Universe and this campaign. Every time they rebuilt the flight model, they rebuilt it twice. Every new ship system, every environmental effect, every AI routine had to work in both contexts. That's not an excuse, it's just the reality of what they chose to do. And now apparently one of those contexts is finished, which means all those developers who've been locked in a basement somewhere working on scripted missions, they're about to have free time. Think back to 2019 for a second. You're sitting in your ship, maybe a Constellation if you'd been saving, maybe just an Aurora if you were smart with your money, watching a sunset over Hurston. Pretty sure, but also kind of broken. The lighting would flicker, shadows would pop in and out, and if you looked at it wrong, your frame rate would tank. Annoying in the Persistent universe, but survivable. You'd just restart and try again. Now imagine you're the poor developer trying to make that same sunset work in a scripted narrative sequence. You've got actors on mocap stages timing their performances to specific lighting cues. You've got a composer writing music that swells at exactly the moment the sun hits the horizon. You've got a director, probably Chris Roberts himself, who wants it to look exactly like that concept art from 2015. And the lighting engine keeps changing because the Persistent Universe team just implemented volumetric fog or some other feature that breaks everything. That's been the reality for years. The campaign team wasn't slow, they were building on quicksand. Every 6 months, the foundation would shift and they'd have to adjust. The flight model got overhauled? Cool, now every dogfight mission needs rebalancing. Server meshing required changes to how AI spawns? Great, now every ambush sequence needs reworking. It's like trying to paint a portrait while someone keeps moving the canvas. What changed, and this is the actual story buried in that announcement, is the canvas stopped moving. The flight model isn't getting another fundamental overhaul. The graphics engine has stabilized enough that they're not doing major rendering rewrites. Server meshing is functional, which means AI behavior is predictable. For the first time since probably 2016, the campaign team is working with finalized tools. They're not building anymore, they're finishing. And finishing is faster than building, even at CIG. If you're getting value from this kind of analysis, the kind that doesn't just repeat press releases but actually thinks through what's happening, subscribe. Not because you'll miss out otherwise, but because it tells YouTube that people want this kind of content. And if you've got thoughts on the timeline, the scope, whether this is finally real or just another round of hopium, comments are open. Real ones, not the usual scam citizen spam. Actual discussion about what this means for the project. There's this thing that happens in long-term projects where you can feel the momentum shift. It's not about press releases or marketing, It's about the texture of the updates. The language changes from "we're working on" to "we're polishing." The screenshots stop being concept art and start being actual gameplay. The demos stop cutting away at convenient moments. That prologue they showed last year, 40 minutes of uncut footage showing complete mission flow, NPC interactions, seamless transitions between gameplay states. That's not a vertical slice carefully constructed to hide problems. That's confidence. Maybe misplaced confidence, but confidence nonetheless. You've probably got that familiar feeling right now, that mix of hope and cynicism that comes from being burned too many times. Answer the Call 2016 isn't just a meme, it's a scar. And every time CIG makes an announcement like this, that scar tissue reminds you what happened last time you believed. But there's a different question worth asking. When was the last time they showed something that looked actually finished? Not impressive tech, not ambitious promises. Finished. That prologue demo had jank, had moments where you could see the seams, but it also had that quality of completeness. The kind you can't fake without spending more money than just finishing the actual thing. And maybe that's the real signal here. Not what they're saying, but what they're willing to show. 40 hours sounds wrong from every angle. Too short for a billion-dollar budget and 13 years of development. Too long for a space combat sim in an era where campaigns are lucky to hit double digits. It's this weird middle ground that makes sense only if you understand what they're actually building. Go back and time the original Wing Commander games if you've still got them installed somewhere. Wing Commander 3, the one that was revolutionary for its time, with all those full-motion video cutscenes and branching mission paths, runs about 12 to 15 hours if you see everything. Wing Commander 4, which pushed the format even further, maybe hits 20 hours if you explore every branch and replay missions. These were considered massive campaigns for their era, epic in scope. And Squadron 42 is claiming to be 2 to 3 times longer than Chris Roberts' previous magnum opus. But then you look at modern WAA single-player games, and 40 hours is either nothing or everything depending on genre. Halo campaigns? 8 to 10 hours, and that's if you're taking your time. Call of Duty? 6 to 8 hours of tightly scripted action. Even something like Cyberpunk 2077, which feels massive, has a main story that runs about 25 hours if you're not getting distracted by side content. A 40-hour linear narrative experience is closer to what you'd expect from a full RPG, not a space sim. It's almost awkwardly long for the genre. And then there's the part they mentioned almost as an afterthought. This is episode 1. They've got 2 more planned. So that 40 hours? That's Act 1 of potentially 120 hours of total narrative content. Suddenly the scope makes more sense when you realize they're not building a game, they're building a trilogy. The Idris M alone has more interior space than entire levels from those old Wing Commander games. The Stanton, that carrier you spent time on in the prologue, has multiple decks, crew quarters, a hangar bay, mess halls, all fully modeled and explorable. That's not padding. That's just the scale they decided to work at. There's this weird thing that happens with long development cycles where the original vision gets compared to modern standards, and suddenly what seemed ambitious in 2012 looks quaint. But they kept building, kept expanding. The campaign that was supposed to be a spiritual successor to Wing Commander became something else entirely. This hybrid of space combat sim, first-person shooter, an interactive movie that doesn't really fit in any existing category. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on execution, but you can't say it's not ambitious. Remember watching that prologue demo during CitizenCon? Maybe you were streaming it live, maybe you caught it later on YouTube, but there was probably this moment about 20 minutes in where something shifted. The player character was walking through the Stanton, talking to crew members, and the animation quality was just there. Not impressive for an alpha, or good, considering the scope, just good, professional, the kind of quality you see in shipped AAA games. And then came that transition, walking through the ship, sitting down in the pilot seat, launching into space. All without a loading screen, without a cut, without that telltale pause that usually means the game is desperately streaming in assets. Just a smooth, continuous flow from one gameplay state to another. The kind of thing that sounds simple until you've tried to make it work in a game engine. The kind of thing that takes years to get right. You could feel the mood shift in whatever community space you were watching from. The joke stopped. The cynical commentary went quiet. Because what they were showing wasn't a carefully curated vertical slice designed to hide problems, it was just gameplay. Messy in places, rough around the edges, but complete. The kind of complete you can't fake without spending more money than just finishing the thing properly. That's when the math started to make sense. Not the timeline. The timeline still sounds insane, but the idea that maybe, possibly, they actually built what they said they were building. Just took them a decade longer than anyone expected. CIG went dark on Squadron 42 for years. Not just quiet, but genuinely locked down. No leaks, minimal updates, just the occasional "we're working on it" in some chairman's letter that nobody really believed. After Answer the Call 2016 became a punchline, after the roadmap to the roadmap became a meme, they learned to shut up until they had something real. This pattern shows up in other long development games that eventually shipped. Cyberpunk 2077 went dark for years before their final marketing push. The Last Guardian disappeared for nearly a decade. When studios finally have confidence in their product, they start talking again. The silence breaks, and CIG is talking again, which means something changed internally. Either they've got something real, or they're about to faceplant harder than they ever have before. There's no middle ground at this point. The tactical reality nobody's discussing. If this ships in 2026, the persistent universe is about to get a massive injection of resources. Right now, a huge chunk of CIG's development capacity is locked into finishing the campaign. Environmental artists building story locations, mission designers scripting sequences, AI programmers making sure NPCs don't walk through walls during critical plot moments. All of that talent, all of those developers who've spent years perfecting their specific corner of the game, they all rotate back to the PU once the campaign ships. That means the pace of Star Citizen development should accelerate post-launch. Not because they'll suddenly get better at project management, but because they'll have double the workforce focused on one product instead of two. Every system they built for Squadron 42, the improved AI, the environmental storytelling tools, the mission scripting framework, all of it gets ported back to the persistent universe. The campaign isn't just a product, it's a testing ground for systems that eventually make their way into the MMO. For people just discovering this project, the campaign is your entry point. It'll teach you flight mechanics, combat, FPS gameplay, all in a structured environment before you get dumped into the chaos of the persistent universe where some guy in a hammerhead will probably blow you up while you're still figuring out how to request landing permission. For veterans who have been around since the Kickstarter, this is validation that the project can actually finish something, proof of concept. And for the skeptics who've been calling it a scam since 2014, this is the moment where you either accept that it's happening or you miss the entire conversation. The thing about being this late is that there's no room for mediocrity. If this launches and it's just okay, just a competent space combat game with good graphics, that won't be enough. Not after this timeline, not after this budget. It needs to be exceptional just to break even on expectations. And that's a hell of a position to be in. The community split on this announcement is fascinating because it's not the usual true believers versus cynics. It's more complicated. You've got people who've been defending the project for a decade suddenly hedging their bets, afraid to hope. You've got critics who've been calling it vaporware starting to go quiet. Not because they're convinced, but because they're not sure anymore. And you've got newcomers who just discovered the project looking around at everyone else's baggage, wondering what they missed. Spectrum forums are doing this weird dance where people are excited but won't admit it. Reddit threads are full of "I'll believe it when I see it," followed by paragraphs analyzing why this time might be different. Even the refund subreddit, usually a reliable source of schadenfreude, is having actual discussions instead of just posting memes. That's new. That's different. There's this running joke that everyone who's stuck with Star Citizen has Stockholm Syndrome. And maybe there's truth to that. But there's also something else happening. People are remembering why they backed this thing in the first place. Not because of FOMO or hype, but because they wanted a proper space sim with AAA production values and no compromises. They wanted the game Chris Roberts always wanted to make but couldn't with 1990s technology. And as frustrating as the wait has been, as many times as the timeline has slipped, that's still what's being built. Whether it's worth the wait is a different question, but at least the question is finally getting close to having an answer. So what do you actually do with this information? Because knowing that Squadron 42 might launch in 2026 doesn't help much if you don't know how to position yourself for it. If you're a current backer who stepped away from the project, maybe in 2018 when it became clear this wasn't shipping anytime soon, maybe earlier, now's the time to check back in. Download the current alpha build, see where the persistent universe actually is. The game that will teach you the mechanics for the campaign is Playable right now. Buggy, unstable, prone to eating your cargo, and occasionally your ship, but playable. Get reacquainted with the controls, the UI, the basic flow of gameplay. Because if the campaign does ship, and you go in cold after years away, you're going to spend the first 3 hours just remembering which key opens doors. If you're considering backing for the first time, wait, seriously. CIG runs free fly events quarterly where they open up the game to everyone for a week or two. Full access, no payment required. Try it during one of those events. See if your system can even run it, because the performance requirements are not friendly to older hardware. See if the gameplay loop actually appeals to you, because this is a very specific kind of game that not everyone enjoys. The campaign will likely be sold separately from Persistent Universe Access, so there's no rush to buy a game package yet. Manage your expectations. Fully playable doesn't mean bug-free. This is CIG. Launch day will have issues. The question is whether those issues are game-breaking or just annoying. Based on the current state of the PU, where you can play for hours without major problems if you know which bugs to avoid, expect annoying but functional. Expect a quick save frequently. Expect some jank, but probably not expect a complete disaster because they can't afford that, not after this timeline. And if you're someone who creates content or participates actively in the community, start preparing for the influx. When this launches, if it launches, there's going to be a wave of new players who've never touched Star Citizen before. People who bought it for the single-player campaign and don't know anything about quantum travel or claim timers or why you should never store a vehicle inside another vehicle. The community that greets them will determine whether this project grows beyond its current audience or stays a niche thing for people with specific tastes and high-end PCs. Three things worth remembering. It's real this time because they're polishing instead of building. 40 hours is actually massive for this genre, and the persistent universe benefits enormously once the campaign ships and all those developers rotate back. But what actually matters is whether you're playing day one or waiting for reviews, because that decision says a lot about how much trust is left after all these years. Are you the person who's going to preload it the second it's available and call in sick to work? Or are you waiting to see if it's actually good before spending money? There's no wrong answer, but there's probably a right answer for you, specifically based on your history with this project. Squadron 42 is either going to be one of gaming's great redemption stories or one of its most spectacular failures. There's no middle ground anymore. Too much time, too much money, too much expectation. It has to be exceptional just to be considered adequate. Until then, keep your expectations cautiously optimistic, and remember, it's not a scam, it's just really, really late. Sometimes those are the same thing, sometimes they're not. We're about to find out which.